James stood in the middle of his modest living room, smoothing down the front of his shirt for the 5th time in 10 minutes. The evening sun cast warm streaks across the walls, making everything feel both peaceful and impossibly nerve-wracking. He hadn't been on a date since Lily's mom walked out 5 years ago, leaving behind a baby and a man who had to figure out everything from bottle feeding to braiding hair. And now, somehow, he'd agreed to a blind date. Lily, now 7 and wise beyond her years, watched him with an amused smirk. She climbed onto the couch and reached up, fixing his crooked collar with tiny, determined fingers. "She'll like you, Daddy," she said matter-of-factly. "You're funny. And you don't burn mac and cheese anymore." That made him chuckle, and he kissed the top of her head, grateful for her spirit. He turned to the mirror, adjusting his hair, breathing deep. On the wall beside it hung an old photo. Him, a younger version of himself, smiling beside his wife, their newborn in his arms. The memory still stung, but tonight wasn't about the past. It was about trying again. James grabbed his keys, gave Lily one last hug, and whispered, "Be good for Aunt Sarah." He paused at the door, taking in the familiar scent of home, then exhaled slowly and stepped out into the cool dusk air. His heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the quiet hope that maybe something good was waiting on the other side. James arrived early, standing just outside the restaurant, hands in his jacket pockets, trying to calm the whirlwind inside him. The place was quiet, just a few families finishing dinner and couples walking hand in hand. He kept glancing at the parking lot, wondering what she'd be like. He only had a first name and a vague description from a friend who set them up. Still, something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was time. Then, he saw her. A woman stepped out of a compact car across the lot, pausing for a moment as if gathering courage. She looked around, spotted James, and offered a nervous smile. As she approached, James opened the door for her, trying to appear more confident than he felt. Just as she reached him, she leaned in slightly and whispered, almost too softly to hear, "My kids are in the car. I didn't know if you'd be okay with that." James froze, not because he was shocked, but because the words hit him somewhere deep. He remembered the times he couldn't find a babysitter, the awkward glances from people when he brought Lily along. Her words weren't just a statement, they were a test. A quiet plea for understanding. He looked into her eyes and saw something familiar. Not desperation, but love. Fierce, protective, vulnerable love. In that split second, his hesitation faded. He nodded gently, offering a small smile, and held the door open a little wider, not just to the restaurant, but maybe to something more. Inside the softly lit restaurant, James and the woman, her name was Rachel, settled into a quiet corner booth near the window. From where they sat, James could still see her car parked under a street lamp. The atmosphere was warm, the kind of place that smelled like fresh bread and nostalgia. At first, there was a flicker of awkwardness between them, two people who hadn't done this in a long time, both guarded, both unsure. But slowly, as menus were set aside and the first few words were exchanged, something began to shift. They talked about their kids. Rachel had two, a boy and a girl, and the conversation turned from surface chatter to shared laughter and knowing nods. She told him about the nights she'd cried in the pantry so her kids wouldn't hear, and he admitted to reading bedtime stories with one arm while folding laundry with the other. They talked about birthdays celebrated with cupcakes on a budget, and how lonely the evenings could get after the kids were asleep. There was no judgment. No pretending. Just two tired, kind-hearted people finding comfort in the fact that someone else out there truly understood. James glanced out the window again, where her kids were still in the car watching a movie. Then he looked back at Rachel, smiled gently, and said, "Want to bring them in? I think Lily would love some new friends." Rachel blinked, touched by the offer, and maybe, just maybe, beginning to believe in second chances. The once quiet corner of the restaurant was now alive with energy and laughter. Rachel's two kids, Emma and Max, sat across from Lily, trading crayons and stories like they'd known each other forever. The table was covered in kids' menus with half-colored drawings, sticky fingers, and spilled juice, but no one seemed to mind. James sat beside Lily, watching the children with quiet awe. There was a peace in the chaos, a joy he hadn't felt in years. Rachel sat across from him, her eyes soft, her guard down. She seemed lighter now, less cautious, more present. They shared little glances across the table, smiles that didn't need words. The waitress brought over extra napkins and offered knowing nods, clearly recognizing the beauty of what was unfolding. This wasn't just a date anymore. It had transformed into something more honest and rare, a moment of connection between two families stitched together by circumstance and understanding. James leaned toward Rachel during a moment of calm. "You've got great kids," he said. She smiled, a real one this time. "So do you." The kids were now giggling over a shared dessert, faces lit up like they'd won a prize. James looked at Lily, then at the table full of laughter, and realized something: this wasn't a distraction from real life. This was real life. Messy. Unexpected. Beautiful. And for the first time in a long while, James wasn't thinking about the past, he was wondering what came next. Outside the restaurant, the night air was cool and quiet, the stars faint above the streetlights. James walked Rachel and her kids to their car, with Lily skipping a few steps ahead, still holding Max's hand. The energy from dinner lingered, but now everything felt slower, softer, like none of them wanted the night to end. Rachel opened her car door and helped the kids climb in. They were sleepy now, full of food and stories, already asking if they could see Lily again. James stood nearby, hands in his pockets, watching with a quiet smile. Rachel turned to him, her expression a mix of gratitude and something deeper. She hesitated, then said softly, "I almost didn't come tonight." Her voice cracked just slightly, betraying the vulnerability behind her calm. James looked at her, really looked at her, the tired eyes, the strong posture, the heart she wore so close to the surface, and replied with the gentlest sincerity, "I'm really glad you did." For a moment, neither of them moved. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense, there was no dramatic kiss or whispered promise, but it was something stronger. A spark of understanding, of mutual respect, of hope. Rachel got in the car, and James walked back to his. Their kids waved at each other through the windows as the engine started. As the cars pulled away in opposite directions, James glanced at Lily through the rearview mirror. She was smiling to herself. And in that instant, he knew, something new had begun.